This is Full Coffers with your host, Phil and Toni Buggs from Abundant Harvest Christian Fellowship Ministries.
And this week on Full Coffers, The Journey, Part 14. All right, back at the corral, we talked about our daughter and how the changing of the guards about dating didn't work out too well.
Daddy, blunder, zealot, pious,
so
wanting everything right.
Yeah, and we had said, kind of gave it a little bit away when she turned 18, but I want everyone to put a bookmark in that. Just put a bookmark in that, because the term back at the corral has meaning. Now, mind you, you know we have two children.
Yes, we do.
And we have a son at home by the name of Philip Jr.
Yes.
Kyle and Philip are the exact same age for 3 days, so they're less than a year apart.
Correct.
And so as Kyle was going through her changes, Philip was going through some changes too.
True.
Now, to give you a little history about our son, my husband stated that our son had been one that tested the boundaries.
Constant.
And that's not an exaggeration.
No. And like I shared before, we give them an order, like play in the backyard, stay away from the fence. Kyle's right there in the middle of the yard, no problem. Philip has got to find out what happens if I touch this fence. Mm-hmm. Zap.
Yeah.
Every time. And that's something I think that our parents, at least on my side, my mother and father had no problem enforcing what they said. Mom and Daddy didn't tell us 3-4 times not to do something or to do something. It was one time, and then there were consequences.
Yeah, that's the same way in Doris's household too.
So for us, so the challenge as parents was to not just set rules, but to enforce them. And in fact, Philip's conformity was really based on my stamina to enforce every time he touched the fence, I have to zap him.
Now, mind you, Philip, my husband, was one of trying to talk to our children first and to say, son, if you do this, this is going to happen.
Right.
Or if our son did get in trouble, well, son, why did you do what you did?
and all of that was predicated upon my upbringing in my household, where I wasn't given an opportunity to say why I was doing stuff. Everything was the belt.
Yeah.
And when I grew up, when I got up, I said I wouldn't do that to my kids.
And for the most part, my husband was the ultimate negotiator. Not so much about right from wrong, but more so explain, tell me why you did what you did. Now, I was, on the other hand, because my son was getting on my nerves.
my Kyle and Philip, they'll tell you, they say, we'd much rather just get it out the way. Mama would just get it out the way. Daddy, he'd have to sit and tell you why he's about to whoop your tail and how many stripes you get. And literally, I did that for two reasons. Obviously, to show them, the error, what they had done wrong. But secondly, I wanted to meter the discipline. And I think that is so important. I won't get into my life, but what I learned was that metered discipline works. And so my kids, they knew that wouldn't be forever. And then after the discipline was done, I was good.
Exactly. We didn't do that, not talking to you for 2 weeks and things like that.
Kids still needed to be loved.
Exactly.
So, no, you do what you had to do. And, of course, when they were younger, it was more physical, corporal punishment. I don't have no problem saying that.
Most people would probably not like that, but that's how we did it.
Yes, and plus when you did it early and you did it correctly, by the time they got older, you didn't have to resort to those measures.
Exactly.
And that's the way we raised our kids. So anyway, back at the corral, that normally would work, but Philip was so strong-willed.
Yeah, he was a special child. Philip, my son.
Our son. Toni didn't have any brothers, so she talks about him.
And so raising a boy was totally new to me. And things that Philip would say, my husband, that's what boys do. I'm thinking, no, it's not. But my son, when we lived in Detroit, he if there wasn't a week that went by that we didn't get a note home
Yeah.
or a phone call at work, I would think something was wrong. Because our son, literally almost every day, I would either get a call at my job or there would be a note home.
Right.
And when he would come home and we would all be home and, what's going on, our son would have a very colorful way of explaining what happened at school.
He had a gifting of manipulation where he always painted himself as
The victim.
yes, and we fell into it
Every time.
until we went up to the school and got
Totally
the other
different picture.
side of the story.
The party left out. So, back in the day, they didn't have this saying, and now it's a little old, but we went up there and got our faces cracked.
Big time.
Just about every time.
Yes,
And,
yes.
it was his pattern of torturing his teachers. He had a teacher, and I have to say this, he had a teacher, he was moved from one teacher who was a horror, and I knew she was a horror. So
Right.
we wanted to move him to another teacher, and it was a male teacher. And we thought at least working with the male, maybe that might help him.
Yeah.
No, our son decided to stab him with a pencil,
yeah.
and then say, "My daddy's going to come up here with his gun and shoot you." Now, mind you, Philip didn't even have a gun back then. So, but that was our son, and we're talking like the second grade.
Yep. What we learned, and if I think I can step into this, is that Philip, there were two things. Philip was, say, highly intelligent. Now, I have to quantify that to say that he picked up things very quickly.
Things that he liked.
Yes, that was the second part, but he picked up stuff very, very quickly. So with that, he got bored with normal classwork. One of the things I recognized about because my mother kept kids, one of the things she found out quick about Philip and Kyle is that Philip gets into trouble when he has time on his hand.
Right.
So when Philip would get through, my mother would always have Philip to do extra things
Very
to
smart.
keep him busy. And it wasn't busy work because Philip wasn't stupid.
Yeah.
It'd have to be meaningful. So that was the one thing. Second thing about Philip was that he knew if you cared about him.
Yeah.
If he found out you didn't care, then he didn't care. And I think that was the bigger issue with his upbringing. And I'm not excusing his behavior because, as Toni and I have first said, we maintain law and order. But there was something else happening. It was, is this a dig on teachers? Can I say that?
Well, I think not
No,
necessarily.
maybe
It
a
was
dig.
just
It was, I think, just the way teachers taught. They were more used to cookie cutter. Everybody does the same thing. And there wasn't much latitude back when Philip and Kyle was coming, much like when you and I were coming up.
And they didn't have the resources, because we're talking mid to late 80s. They didn't have a lot of the resources
That we have
Now,
nowadays.
while we were in Michigan, we had them tested. Teachers wanted us to put them on Ritalin.
Yeah.
We took them to the doctor, and actually, our pediatrician says, "I'm not going to do that," because he didn't need it.
Yes.
It wasn't even ADHD.
No,
it was just
no.
he was hyperactive.
He was hyperactive, yeah.
And the doctor just didn't
Right.
go for it.
Because-
And the one time he did give us, because of the pressure we were getting from the teachers.
The school wouldn't let him back in unless
Right.
we did that, yeah.
We gave him that first dose of whatever that was, and he tore the classroom up. And so we did everything that we could during those times. If they wanted us to get him tested, we did. We took him to a psychologist at University of Detroit once a week, and honestly, he was really not diagnosed with anything. And so after that, there was really nothing more we can do other than make sure at home, we took care of what we needed to take care of. We'd always tell him, you go to school, your teacher is like your parents. But he didn't get that connection.
No.
He did not. He knew who his parents were, and he knew who his teachers were. And so that kind of carried on when we moved to Nashville.
True.
As well.
Yep.
He went to a elementary school, and one teacher kind of understood him.
Yeah. She liked Philip, and I think Philip liked her. Again,
Yes.
that's the first barrier. And I'm not saying teachers have to play up, but there is a way that you interact with kids. And kids can pick up on whether or not you are just playing them or whether or not you generally are trying to make their best interest. And Philip saw that. When we're not painting Philip as some unique person, I think he falls within an average range of most kids who have that disposition.
Yeah.
That they want to know that you care about them.
Exactly.
And,
there has to be a relationship set up between the teachers and students.
True.
So when we moved to Nashville, we still same situation, calls and notes, suspensions, There's been a lot of times Philip's been suspended from school. And then we get into junior high, and he discovered football.
Right.
But a lot of times he would quit the team because he wasn't
the coach didn't play him.
Yeah,
he wasn't the best.
He wasn't the best athlete out there.
And I don't believe in participation awards.
Yeah, and neither did his coaches either. So,
but he liked his coach.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, he didn't go soft on Philip, but he cared about Philip. And there's a difference. You could be hard on someone. And Philip, not all Philip teachers that he liked were nice to him.
Exactly.
They kicked him in the tail, know. But he knew that they had their his best interest. But anyway,
exactly. So as you can see, we're kind of painting a picture about our son. So, he gets through junior high. There were several incidences in that. And then he gets to high school.
Right.
And so the first year, for the most part, it went okay.
Right.
Philip was maturing. He was getting older. And really didn't have a whole lot of issues with Philip initially. In high school, you're not going to get the notes home. You're pretty much going to get suspended. But for the first year, he did okay. Grades were, Philip could have been an A student, but he never applied himself. So, he was a BC student.
Right.
Fast forwarding into, the summer after his freshman year, he had turned 15 and he got his first job.
Yep.
And he was working at a local grocery store. Yep. And, we're trying to think, okay, Philip's finally maturing and he's kind of getting out there and doing some things. And, Philip was a cart boy, whatever they call those people.
Return to shopping carts. There was some probably very, very nice term for it. But,
yeah.
But he was a cart wrangler.
Yeah. And he didn't like that job. No, he wanted to stay in the store. And, I was thinking, we're summertime in Nashville. It's humid. It's hot. And he had been working this. And so as a reward for Philip, we decided one Saturday to go and get him a cell phone. Back then the cell phone, we were going to get him a cell phone. And so, we got him that. And that Saturday when we picked him up from work, he came out and he basically said he got fired. And we were like, well, why did you get fired? He says, because I didn't feel like picking up those carts. Nobody else was doing it, so I didn't think I had to do it. So once again, Philip is thinking that the rules
didn't apply
to
him.
And much to our chagrin, we said, well, we had this phone for you, but we took it back.
Yep.
So we were starting to see a pattern in Philip as he was getting older. So again, fast forwarding to school, he entered the 10th grade, and he had acquired friends. He had some elementary school friends, middle school friends, but now he had some different type of friends. They're a little older, some of them. Some of them drove cars and things like that. So I'm going to fast forward to probably the second semester of his sophomore year.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I get a phone call, and I'm driving somewhere in Nashville, and I get a phone call from an officer who tells me that she is the officer at Antioch High School, and she also commences to telling me that she has my son in custody, and he's going to be transported to the Juvenile Detention Center downtown Nashville, and I needed to make arrangements to come pick him up.
Now, if I can break in for a moment, because prior to Toni getting that phone call, I was on my job who had sent me out of town. Now, we live in Nashville. I'm down in Mobile, Alabama, right on the Gulf at some big steel plant. I have to walk outside to get the phone. Or answer my phone. And I answer the phone, and this lady says, yes, is this Mr. Bugs? I said, yes. She says, this is Miss whatever her name was. We have your son, Philip, at juvenile detention, and we wanted to know when you can pick him up. And if there was a camera around, I would have looked in the camera. And he said, this is a joke. Where's Alan Font at? This has got to be. And I says, ma'am, is this, are you kidding with me? She says, Mr. Bugs, by no means am I kidding. And she commenced to telling me that my son had been picked up for possession of marijuana.
Weed.
Mary Jane. Yeah. And I mean, my world crumbled. It crumbled. I had no clue. And so basically I told the lady, I says, ma'am, I'm 10 hours away. I says, you're going to have to call my wife. Now, between the call that they gave me and the call that my wife took, I'm sure Philip was thinking, if there's anybody you don't want to call, it is my mother. I'd rather have my father, because at least he'd tell me why he was about to kill me. So anyway, pick back up.
I get the phone call next, and I'm saying, you're kidding me, right? Honestly, I was literally, I probably said the same thing Philip said, because I said, are you sure?
Yeah.
Philip Bugs Jr., are you sure? And again, she was very matter of fact, and she says, I'm very sure.
Yeah.
And so I had my mother in the car. I had to take her home, and I had to start driving back downtown to the Nashville Juvenile Justice Center. And I'm pulling up in the parking lot, and I'm not knowing, first of all, what to expect. I didn't know a thing. This was so new to me.
Yes,
and I
us.
Parked the car, and I crossed the street, and I entered this building, and I'm seeing parents wall to wall, and none of them looked happy. And I go up to the clerk and ask, where do you pick up the kids that's been arrested? And they said it's downstairs. And I go downstairs, and again, wall-to-wall parents, and I see people. I mean, I'm literally, if you ever had the effect of someone slapping you and your face was still hot.
And it's that ringing.
Yes. That's where I was.
Yeah.
I was in a fog.
Yes.
And so finally I sit down and I wait for the officer to come. And she tells me that him and some other guys had been off the campus. And when they came back, the resource officer smelled marijuana on them. So they were all brought into the office and searched. Now, although my son is bright in some things, he's not very bright in other things.
When you high,
you don't have any senses. So my son,
yes, he did,
had taken, I guess the guy said, hey, Phil, you carry the paraphernalia.
Yeah.
And so when we get in, we'll divvy it up when we get in. Now, I believe he was being set up because Philip, although smart, was naive.
Yes.
He comes in, the resource officers call them in, and so when it was time to search, who had the paraphernalia?
Boom.
Philip.
Yep.
Now, when questioned by the resource officer at the school...
I have to chime in here.
Go right ahead.
Philip, still lingering from the effects of marijuana, and the resource officer asked him, where did you get this from? Philip, in all that he could muster up, responded, these are not my pants.
Yeah.
That's the best he could come up with.
Now, we know this is a serious subject, don't get me wrong, but in levity,
yes.
I told my son, this may sound really weird, but if you transition this life before I do, what I'm going to put on your tombstone is the last words of, these weren't my pants. Now, we're talking a lot of time ago, and since we have had many laugh about it,
yes.
But the seriousness of my son, the son of Philip and Toni Bugs Sr., the son who was conceived in love, whose parents had fell in love and dated and went through all those wonderful times together. Here I am in juvenile detention with my 15-year-old son being picked up for possession of marijuana. And when the officer came out and talked to me, I really don't remember exactly what she said, but I do remember what I said. Where do you sign to turn your kid over to the state?
Yep.
Those are my exact words.
She ain't lying there.
Because of the anger and the hurt and the rage that I felt, he would be better off being the ward of the state than coming home with me, because I was just shocked.
Sure.
And so after she allowed me to vent, she calmly said, Mrs. Buggs, you don't want to do that. And I said, yeah, I do. And she said, Mrs. Buggs, let me just say this. You can't do that, okay? She says, what we're going to do is set you up with counseling, family counseling. He's going to be on probation. He's going to have to report to a probation officer every week.
Right.
He's going to have to also go to some classes, drug classes, substance abuse classes. And I'm thinking to myself, all of this is going to change our world. Forever.
Yeah.
Because because of his wrongdoing and poor choices, it's going to affect my husband's life. It's going to affect my life. We're going to have to make accommodations. I'm going to have to bring strangers in my home to have counseling on my children. I mean, all the feelings that I think any parent would have, because at this point, the state has taken away my rights to my son.
Philip has given those rights to the state.
Exactly.
We lost our privilege, if I say it like that, to raise our children.
Exactly.
And I guess when I say it like that, we tried to raise our children to abide by the law. And countless in Detroit, the series Cops had came out, and I told Philip what it was like to lose your freedom. I says, you don't ever want to have handcuffs put on you. You want to always be able to control when you go to the bathroom, when you want to eat. And I tried, but you can talk and talk and talk. At some point, a decision is made, and you have to live with those decisions. And with Philip, that is what happened. It's amazing because Philip had just gotten his driver's license.
And
it was
revoked.
Yes. He lost his driver's license privileges.
In addition to, he was expelled from school.
For the next school year.
For the remainder of the year.
Yep.
And so everything in a moment's time changed in our lives on that day.
Yep.
So I looked down the hall, and behind the glass doors, I see my son coming. And it looked like he looked and ducked back because he probably says, oh, shoot, it's her.
It's not him. I got her.
He probably told the officer, can I just stay
Take me
here?
back.
Because, again, I was just so outdone and so angry. So I had to sign the papers. I had to set up the counseling sessions. And all this time, I couldn't even look at Philip. And honestly, he wasn't looking at me. And when we came out the door, I said, don't even walk with me. And he had to walk probably 10 paces behind me.
Probably safe. It was out of striking distance.
And then I told him to sit in the back of the car. Now, what's happening next? I don't honestly, please forgive me what I'm going to say. I wasn't in my right mind. But the anger was I didn't even know, how did he get the drugs? How long had he been smoking weed? So I got him in the car and I began driving home, and I found myself speeding up, and I told him I was getting ready to approach a bridge that went over the
Cumberland River.
The river.
Yep.
And I said, Philip, if you don't tell me everything that has happened, I swear to you, I will drive both of us off this bridge. And at that time, I have to admit, I was serious about that. And I think he knew I was serious about that. So, and no offense to the Black Baptist experience, but my son started speaking in tongues. He was rattling off things. I don't even think he knew what he was talking about.
Oh, yeah. He started singing like a bird.
Yes, he did.
Yes, he did.
Because
everything.
We didn't even know.
We had no clue.
And after it was all said and done, he had been smoking weed
for over a
year.
year.
A while.
Yeah.
He said he hid it in bushes on his way to school. He was off campus more than he was on. And I'm thinking to myself, Toni, what dummies you were.
Yeah.
You didn't even know. I trusted my son that when he said he was going down so-and-so's house, I'm thinking they're playing video games or working on cars. But what he was doing is smoking weed.
And we learned later that he did that because he would go down to his friend's house, and, I checked out the house. They would be out there playing basketball. I said, okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
What I recognized is that they were rarely out there playing basketball, and they didn't force Philip
No.
But in order to be a part, everybody was in the house smoking weed.
Yeah.
And
Parents
so-
were gone.
Yeah. So Philip, it wasn't like it was forced on him in order to be part of the group.
Exactly.
And they didn't even force it. They just as if you want.
Right.
This is what we're doing.
Right.
And so it was that slow.
And it seemed as if they were having so much fun
Right.
being high
Yep.
that he wanted to have fun too.
To be a part.
Exactly.
And so that is what started. We're not excusing the
No,
behavior. We're
no.
explaining it. And our naivety as parents, look, I don't take anything away from that. You're not going to dot every I and cross every T.
That's right.
And for us, the innocence and naivety of our parenting, because both in Toni and my family, it was just Toni and her sister, but I had 5 other brothers and sisters, and none of us had ever experienced anything against the law or any involvement in the law. We
right.
knew nothing about that. So to have this come into our lives was definitely, talk about a crash course.
Oh, man.
And in reality, it busted our bubble, which honestly, looking back, I still hate that it happened, but in the same breath, I'm glad it happened because it made us wiser as parents.
Exactly.
It made us wiser.
But going through that process, because during that summer, 3 times a week, Philip had to go to his drug court classes. So
Yes.
I had to take him down there, and I had to wait for him. He also had to check in with his probation officer. It was to the point where if he wanted to go to youth meeting at a local church, we had to get permission. And that just made me crazy because now we're talking about you're messing with my faith.
Yeah.
But I had to literally call a perfect stranger and ask permission if my son could go to Bible study.
And it wasn't every time that she says, hey, no problem.
That's exactly right.
Sometimes it was no.
Exactly.
And we had to abide.
Hey, I couldn't do a thing about it. And also because in order for him to go to school, he had to go to alternative ed. And I knew based upon, when kids go to alternative ed, I know what that was.
Yeah.
And so we had to make some sacrifices. Now, praise God that I had a job that was pretty flexible during that time because Philip was out of town a lot.
Right.
I homeschooled my son.
That's right.
And I should say we made the decision jointly that I would homeschool him because for him to go to alternative ed,
No, we knew what that was
just
gonna
coming
do.
from what he experienced, that was just putting gasoline on the fire.
And to the point also, both of us had just received our bachelor's degrees because that was one of the criteria to homeschool.
Yes.
That you had to have a bachelor's
That's
degree.
right.
And fortunately, both of us had just completed our bachelor's
That's
degree.
right. So we ordered the books that he had in junior year, and I had a
11th grade.
schedule for him. And basically, he was in lockdown for a very
whole
long
year.
time.
Yep.
And, we're going to talk more about Philip and Kyle and their experiences. But if I would say, again, the takeaway today is, that experience hurt us both. It hurt us so much. But as Philip said, in a way, it opened our eyes to things. Because if you're living in this glass house, you shouldn't throw stones. And if you're living in, you're wearing these rose-colored glasses, and as I said in the other episode, we were approaching that middle-class standard.
I had Carol and Mike Brady, all up in my stuff.
They were poster children,
Oh, Lord, Yeah, I'm simply saying, oh, yeah, this is it. And, I recognize that this ain't life.
No, it's not.
Turn the TV off. This is reality.
This is reality.
And do I, well, you should have known. No, I shouldn't have known.
No.
And truth be told, every parent, you don't dot every I and cross it.
And you shouldn't expect your kids to be on drugs. I'm sorry. That's not the expectation.
No, it isn't. But what the expectation is that things don't necessarily go the way you plan.
That's right.
And you have to be able to roll with the punches. And for Toni and I, we had to learn how to roll with the punches, and sometimes very quickly.
Yeah.
Those are things that we had to do. As we go into the next episode, we're going to share with you from the end of innocence.
Yes. The age of innocence is gone.
The age of innocence is gone into the reality of more marriage, of more growing the family, of just what happens. And for us, it's a Christian family, and my faith was not deterred. But I recognize that, good things happen to good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people.
That's right.
And, that's just a fact of a fallen world we live in. That's a fact of life.
But I must admit, that definitely was an awakening for me.
Let's slide over. We both can sit on that bus. So, again, we hope that this has been helpful to you.
Yeah.
We still, every time that we put out a podcast, try to be realistic, transparent, and relative to what you may be going through. And hopefully you will find value in the coffers that we're trying to fill in your life.
So check out our website, and there's a way you can contact us. So if you have any questions about anything as we're talking about things, put it in there, and we will get back to you.
So true.
So until next time, we will see you later.
See ya. This episode was produced and edited by Miss K. Simone. Cover graphics by Indefinite. Music by Miss K. Simone. So until next time, I'm Phil Bugs.
And I'm Toni Bugs.
Wishing you a wonderful week.